Hello and welcome to this tutorial where I'm going to have a look at user interface widgets, and I'm going to break down a little bit about the principles behind how to make them and then how to use them in your game. So before we get started, I should say that for this tutorial, I'm going to be using advanced mode because we're going to need to do some HTML5 scripting and some Lua scripting. So we'll use HTML5 for the actual widget itself, and we'll use Lua to send data backwards and forwards to that widget to display and communicate between the HTML widget and the game world in Crayta. So now that we've talked a little bit about that, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to build a widget that exists in the game world and that you can walk around, but it's totally possible for you to also follow this tutorial and add the widget to the user instead if you want it to appear superimposed on the game world on the user's screen. So if you want to make a more traditional UI kind of approach, like this power bar here, for example, then you can totally follow the same principles, but just add it to the user rather than the game world. So to start with, let's add a locator to look after our, let's add a locator, and our locator is literally just going to be the parent object behind that looks after our UI widget. So I'm just going to put it there. My start location is here and my locator is there. And it just means that I can move the widget around and all of that sort of stuff without having it attached to a specific mesh or anything. Okay, I'm going to change the name of my locator to be leaderboard locator, like that. And then I'm going to do entity, add UI widget, new UI widget. And so this is where I can build my leaderboard. And there it is. So it's already superimposed itself on my screen, and that won't necessarily work as expected. So let's go down in my leaderboard locator, scroll to the bottom where my widget has been added into the entity editor, and I'm just going to change the type to be world. And you can see it's kind of disappeared, but it's actually flickering away in there, and we can see it's gone also upside down. So let's get that appearing for us. So we're going to rotate it this way and then down, and then let's move it up like this. There it is, a tiny, tiny scoreboard. Okay, we want it a little bit bigger than that, I think. So let's do that. We can do that in the locator in the widget here, but a better way would be to click this edit this asset button on the leaderboard, which should pop up with a code editor. Now your code editor might pop up like this. I've changed it to be a bottom source editor because it's a lot faster for me to change the HTML5 code and then see it update on the screen without flicking backwards and forwards between tabs. I don't want to have to move my hands to keyboard and mouse too much. Okay, so there's our widget, and let's just change the size of it. So the widget itself is broken into three parts. The first part at the top here is the styling, and that handles things like the position of things, fonts, colors, all of that sort of stuff, what it looks like really. The second part, when you get to the body and it says your HTML code here, this HTML code is really all about the content. HTML is a language that's designed to give content meaning and also to display content to people. So normally in your Crayta games, you've been using maybe some Lua scripting. And so that scripting language is really ideal for real-time game models and manipulations and stuff like that, and shooting bullets and all of that kind of stuff. HTML is way better suited to displaying users' information on the screen. So neither is better than the other. They're just different tools for different jobs. And so this HTML code is really, really good at displaying information to people, which makes it perfect for user interface widgets. So we've got styling first, then HTML code, and then we have this JavaScript code here. And the JavaScript code at the bottom is really all about manipulating our data and making it into a nice human readable format and then displaying it in the content HTML here So we kind of get sent our data to the JavaScript model here, and then we do some JavaScript to it, and then it gets presented in the HTML. And the styling comes in by telling the game face engine, which is the UI engine, the styling tells that how to present that data. Okay, so hopefully that's connected some things up in your brain. And you've got a bit of an understanding about what all these different parts of this widget are for. Now, let's have a look at this widget itself. And if I wanted to change some aspect of it and style it slightly differently, I could do that using the styling here. So we've got, for example, this bit of content between this div class container here and this /div here. This is describing this black box in front of us. So between that and that is our black box. The way that container is being drawn, so the way that this is displayed, is decided by this CSS here, which says .container. So the dot means anything of type class. So with a class here, where the class is container. So class equals container. So this bit of CSS relates to this bit of JavaScript, this bit of HTML, sorry. This bit of CSS relates to this bit of HTML. And so we can, if we tweak some of this CSS here and save it, it will update what this looks like on the screen. For example, let's say I wanted to make this box red. We've got this appearance section here, and it says background RGBA. And RGB means red, green, blue, and A stands for alpha. So 000 would paint it a black color because there's no red, no green, and no blue in there at all. So it's the deepest, darkest black. If I was to make the first number here, which refers to R, if I make that 255, which is the maximum amount that you can put into RGBA, and save that, you'll see it updates to be a red box. If I put that as 0 and put 255 in here, we're expecting to see if R was the first one, and that stands for red, the second one is this, so we're expecting to see it turn green, and so on. So we can do small changes like that. And let's say for the purposes of this tutorial, I want to make this opaque, so you can't see through it. I'm going to change this last number instead of 0.75 to be 1.0, and that will make this completely opaque, so we can't see through it anymore. So by changing this bit of CSS here, it's essentially updating what it looks like. If we want to make it bigger, there's this display section here with a width and a height. So if I wanted to make it bigger, I could do 100, 100, and oh, it's disappeared. Where has it gone? So it also has this position stuff, and this position stuff is really designed for it to be superimposed on the screen. So what we can do is we can just get rid of this, and we've got it back. And it's filled, now it's filled our widget container completely. So for example, if I put this as 50, just to show that, the widget container you can see is the yellow outline. And if I put it at 100 by 100, it fills that completely. And we can increase the size by also increasing this number here. So maybe 300 by 300. So we're just changing the CSS and we're changing the size of this leaderboard. I'm going to drop that down to 150, drop that down to 50. Let's put that at that. Let's put that at VW. Yeah, viewport width and viewport height. So now when I change this, it will change that. So if I change that to be 200, it changes that. So now our size is more suited to what's going on over here than what's going on in here, which could be good for you, or it might not be what you require. Anyway, that's the CSS side of things, and that's styling, and there's lots and lots of great resources on that. Particularly, I would recommend W3 Schools for CSS. w3schools.com/CSS gives you Lots of great tips on how to write CSS and write it well. Also, there's CSS Tricks, which is another great website. And I would really recommend CSS Tricks for some of the more whizzy stuff like CSS animations and things like that. So going back into here, we've got some text and stuff displaying. So how do we change this content? We know how we can change the styling. How can we change the content? Well, a simple way would be to change this content down here. I'm just going to increase the size of our H2, which is a header. So you can see this H2 here. That's the header, which says your header here. Let's increase the size of that. Fonts dash size. Let's make it 5 rem. And let's do the same with the P tag, just so we can see what's going on. Let's make it 3.5 rem. Okay, so we've got our header text there and some other text there. So at the moment, the P tag, this is what's called statically typed, which means that this will never change no matter what happens in the game. This H2 has this special thing inside the tag itself, which says data dash bind dash value equals quote marks, 2 parentheses, example model dot data end parentheses end quote marks. And then it doesn't actually have anything between it. Whereas this one has some text between the two tags. This doesn't have any. So how is it displaying your header here? To find the answer to that, we scroll to the bottom of our widget code. And you can see it's doing some crazy stuff in JavaScript. So the first bit it does is it creates a model to store data for your widget. So a model, in this situation, a model just means the data, the hard data that's going on that exists in things like variables and stuff like that. So the model is about the data. So where you see the term model, that's what it's referring to. And we can see that it's got another thing here, which says example coherent function. And this is just showing us, all right, if you wanted to update this data, you could run this function. And it says you can run it either like this or like this. You can run this function and it will update it for us. And then this is really about what happens when you click that button at the bottom. So our H2 is looking for example model.data. And our data says your header here. So that relates to that. If I change this to be something else, maybe it says no your header here. Save that, you can see that it's automatically updated. So we're going to need to use this data to update this, to change the actual content on the widget. And we can use statically typed stuff, which never changes, and we can put that straight into the HTML like that. Or we can use this kind of way. And this is really about the data model. We create our data model down here, and then the HTML just reacts to any changes in that data model. So when we update the data model and we run engine.update whole model and engine.synchronize models, when we run those two things after changing that model, it will update whatever text is in here. Or it doesn't have to be text, it can be lots of different things. And we'll look at API hooks for GameFace in a minute. So we've got our header, and we've got our P tags. Now, how do we go about creating a leaderboard? Well, for that, we don't actually need some of this code in here. Let's delete it, and let's put in an H1 that says leaderboard. Like that. And it's just added this tiny little H1 up here. I'm going to get rid of these things. Actually, I'm going to keep that. I'm going to add H1 as another thing that's 5 rem. So we can do that like that. And let's text align that center. Like that. There we go. So we've got a header for our leaderboard. Now we also are going to need rows of scores with usernames and the score they got in there. And so to do that, we're going to use divs. And like I said before, a div is essentially just a box of HTML of content, of HTML content. So we're going to do div. And I'm going to give this a class, and this is going to be the leaderboard. So this is just going to separate the leaderboard itself from any of the stuff around the edge of it. End div here. And then inside there, I'm going to do div class equals leaderboard. That is not the way you spell leaderboard. There we go. The class of this is going to be a leaderboard board dash row. Like that. And I'm just going to put some headings in here. So we're going to have leaderboard div class equals leaderboard column. Like that. I'm just going to put two columns in for now. It's just going to have the username and their score. I'm going to allow that. So notice that I can call these things the same if I want to. So I'm going to save that, and I'm just going to put some dummy content in here. So this is going to have a P tag, and this is going to be my username. So let's just use my tag for now. And in here, we're going to add a score, and I'm going to use an appropriate score for what game I'm making here. So something around that. And we can see that it's come up here and it's added that onto my leaderboard. So now that I've done this basic structure of my HTML, it's time to style it. As you can see, this hasn't styled it in a nice row like I would have wanted it to. So we're going to have to go up here to our CSS and do some styling. So div.leaderboard. One good handy tip that you might enjoy is if you use borders and set them to 1 pixel, solid, and then a color like white, you can actually see the boundaries of different things. You might need to set it to more than 1 pixel if you can't see it properly. So we can see my leaderboard looks like that. Let's look at the leaderboard row. And for that, I'll grab the border again and I'll put red in. So that is the full length. Div.leaderboard col. And again, and let's put blue in for that. And we can see that at the moment they're styled on top of each other. So in order to stop that from happening, I'm going to take my leaderboard row. I'm going to change this to display flex. And that will then, essentially what that means is that any divs underneath that reduce the size of the content and they will display next to each other if they can. Another thing I can do is in the col itself, I can set the width specifically. And then we have the width of this to be exactly in half. And I can do something like div.leaderboard-col P, and then text align that center. That didn't work. I needed to do it there. If I text align that center, essentially we can see that has a nice central alignment now. And I can get rid of the border stuff afterwards. At the moment, I'm just using it to debug what I'm doing. And I might say, hang on, I would quite like the 300 to be left aligned. So I might come in here and do this leaderboard col and then put num and say this is a class num, and then div.leaderboard -col .num. So now a div that has both of these classes, and then text align that left. Something like that. So we could do something like that if we wanted to. Now, what does that look like if I have multiple rows? Let's find out. Okay, so that seems to work fairly okay. And you could probably continue on and dive into that CSS a little bit more and really sort it out. But I want to move on to the next bit because I think the next bit is something that many people will find the most useful. And that's how to get this model updating in this user interface widget. So at the moment, this is all statically coded. This is all hard coded values. So how are we going to go about getting hold of the username and the scores? Okay, to do that, we're going to need to use Lua scripting combined with HTML5 scripting too. So let's start by wherever I've got my widget, whether that's on the user or on a locator like I have here. Let's add a script. This is essentially going to be our leaderboard manager script. So I'm going to just call it leaderboard script. And this script's job is to gather data from the game world and send it to the JavaScript in our widget. I'm going to turn off the, I'm going to full screen source editor for a bit now, because I'm going to be coding in Lua and HTML and dipping back into here. So I just want to be able to see a little bit better in here. So let's open this script up. Okay. When do I want to gather the leaderboard data? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do it on the init function. I'm just going to go back to break this down a little bit. So let's have a look at the init function. Let's just create a really basic data model ourselves and then hook up the communication between the leaderboard script and the leaderboard itself. And then we'll have a look at how we go and get the leaderboard data actually from the Crayta API. So let's just, first of all, let's just create some basic data. So let username, not let, local username equals, and I'm going to call it something different. So handy, and local score equals 500. So we've got those two things. And if we go in here in our widget, we can see that it's expecting some kind of input into our function. Okay, so setting up the communication between them is actually relatively straightforward. The way we need to do this is any UI widget is really updated on the client machines rather than being updated on the server, because the server manages kind of what's going on in the game, but it doesn't really have any display. What's displayed to the players of the game actually is happening on the client. So rather than being on the init function, this needs to be on client init. And what we can do is go to our leaderboard widget and just get hold of this self get entity example widget.js call function thing. So I'm just going to highlight that bit of code, copy that, and I'm going to paste it in my client init. Paste it there. There's something I need to change in here before it will run, and that's where it says example widget. My widget was called leaderboard with a capital L. So I'm going to change that to be leaderboard with a capital L here. And then I'm just going to save that. And let's read what this is doing. So it's essentially getting hold of the widget that this script is attached to an entity. So get hold of that entity and get hold of the widget that's attached to that entity that's called leaderboard. Communicate with the JavaScript in that entity and call the JavaScript function whatever is in this first in the first quotes here. So example coherent function, which relates to this example coherent function here. Essentially sending out some kind of event, and this leaderboard is listing out for that event. Alongside that, send the data some new text in quote marks, and that will then arrive in this input variable here, and we can then use that input variable to update our data model and then run these update whole model and synchronize models, which talk to the game face engine, which is essentially what's managing the UI. So now that I've written that, I'm just going to run this before I go any further. I'm just going to run this and make sure that this is working. Notice that I've added this console.log enter here. So you can actually output from the UI widget. You can output using JavaScript using the console.log function, and it will output here in our console, which is super handy. So we can actually, let's output what comes in from the input. So updating model to, and then comma input. And that will just take whatever is in here, turn it into a string, and then put it, join it, concatenate it onto the end of that string there. Let's give it a test and see what happens. Press F5. So we got the console information there. And if I walk up to the leaderboard, you can see that some new text has been entered into that first part there. So essentially, to get that text working, I don't know if you saw me do that bit, but it's essentially any kind of tag where you want to display information within the first tag. So the opening tag here without the slash in it, we're going to need this data-bind-value. So copy that and put that in there. And that's saying the data that has the value. And then we just need to reference which piece of data that is. So we do that in quote marks and then double parentheses, open and close. So the data that we want to include in there is example model, which is the name of our model. And it comes up with code hint there, which is really handy. But engine.create.js model, example model, that's something you're looking for. And wherever that is, that's the model that's being used in this widget. So get hold of that model. And then we're looking for whatever this part here is called. So this is whatever this data within that model is that you're after. Because we can add multiple datas to this. Like that. So we can comma separate a list in here. So we're going to use example model dot data. And that will then mean that the first box then updates with any new data that comes in. So far, so good. So we have a leaderboard script, which is communicating with our leaderboard. Now, what about these variables that I set up here? How can we send them through? Well, firstly, we need to set up our data model in here to be able to reflect what's going to be going on in the leaderboards. Now, if I go to the Crayta API, which is at api.crayta.com/leaderboards, I can actually see in the documentation what I can expect to get. So the one I'm going to probably use is this get top values. Get nearby values would be more useful for when I've just hammered the hammer. So the one I'm probably going to get is this get top values, and it says gets the top ranking values from the specified leaderboard. Results are returned as a parameter to the callback function. Callback function parameter is a table of results. Each result contains name, score, rank, and icon. So that's what I can expect. A table, if you don't know, in Lua, a table is also like an array in other languages. So we can expect a table of results, name and score. So let's use those as the names of our variables here. So let's create a fake row of data. Local fake row equals, and the first parameter is name, and I'm going to use the username there. And the second is score, so I'm going to use score for that one. So that's the fake row, and I'm going to pass that fake row instead of some new text, fake row, like this. So now that's sending that fake row, that data that I've just used there, that's sending that to the JavaScript model in here. It's sending it to this example coherent function. And we can actually output, we're outputting that data there. Now it's saying example model.data equals input. So we will need to store that fake row in a way that makes sense to our data model. So we actually need to update our data model in here too. So now that we have those set up, we just need to pass the fake row. We've done that. So that's coming into the input. So we need to set up this data model to reflect what's coming in. So let's do that now. So we can expect something with a name and a score. So name is going to be, and let's put in some dummy data just so that we know whether it's working or not. Some name, score will be 100. So I'm just making sure that that's different from what I wrote in my fake row. Yep, that's different. And then when the example coherent function runs, I want to update this. So there's no more example model.data anymore. There's example model.name equals input.name. And then example model.score equals input.score. So this sends that row with name and score. We're using name and score, and we're updating our example model, and then we're running the update whole model and synchronize models to make sure that it's propagated across our game. And let's run the game and see what happens. So now when I run it, undefined and 300. Okay, so we missed a step. So that's updating our model, which is fine. this is throwing an error because there's no longer anything called data. So whereas before it was updating that p tag with whatever data was going on in the data model down here, we now need to update that. So example model.name, and then we should also, while we're here, add in the score. So let's get rid of that 300 and put in score here, like that. Oh, and we're missing some quote marks, which is why it's getting angry. There we go. So that will be put into there, and that will be put into there. Okay, let's try that out. So going up to it, yeah, we can see Andy and 500. Yes, so my data is now being updated. So this fake row is being sent into here. So the next step is going to take us into a little bit further into what's going on with the Coherent Games Lab, the game face stuff, where we're going to need to look at, okay, now that we've got one result, how about multiple results? So to get started with that, what I might do is just stop calling this function here. And let's go back to just coding in the widget in the JavaScript here. Let's change this so that instead of it being these parentheses, I'm going to create an array instead. So using square brackets. And then within the array, I'm going to put parenthesis, which is an item within the array. And this is, or a table if you want, if you're a Lua scripter. And this is essentially now a JavaScript array full of these kind of objects. And it's going to get upset because it doesn't know what example model.score is. But I can change this. So if I do square bracket 0 and square bracket 0 here, that should do that. Hang on a second. Okay, so it looks like I got this slightly wrong, and you can't do this in GameFace, which is totally fine. You go straight in for the for loops. So I wanted to see whether we could break this down, but this is as far broken down as we can go before we do the for loop stuff. Okay, so we need in leaderboard row, we're going to do data bind, whoop, not in capitals, we're not. Data dash bind dash 4. Like this, and we're going to do example model. Here we go. Yes, so I've updated this model, I should say. So we've got example model is still the name of the model, and then we've got parentheses, open and close, and we've got an item within that model called scores. It's just one item. Within that item, it's got an array. So that item is an array of these data entities here, and each of those has a name and a score. So data bind for example model dot scores, like that. And we just need to, so essentially, yeah, we just need to, the for loop should iterate through every item within this array. That's what this is doing now. It's saying for every item within the array, create a new div class leaderboard row, and then all of the content within there until this end div here. Now to get hold of the thing within that array, so within this example model.scores, so this array down here, we need to we want to grab one of those items each time. And the way we do that is we give it a name here. So this could be record, like this, colon, and then open parentheses twice, close parentheses twice. So now it's going through this array and it's saying, all right, the next thing, whatever this piece of data is, put that in this record variable here. And so rather than using this kind of method here, we can just do record.name and record.score. And it will create a new row for each record, and then it will put the name in the first column and then the score in the second column. Let's see whether that works. So if I run that, we can see that some name and 100 has been put in. Let's add some more values just to test it out. So copy that and comma, separate this. Let's add 3. Some name 2, some name 3, And let's do 200 and 700. So my data model, I'm changing it slightly so that we've got some more data in it. And then run that again, and we can see that it's added more rows, some name 2, some name 3. And it's doing it in the order that the rows appear in that array. And that's essentially the crux of our UI widget. So now we have this data and we've got a for loop and it's updating that. Let's go back to our leaderboard script, and we could call this fake row some more, but let's go and have a look at our API docs, and let's do the leaderboards.get top values. Just copy that. Okay, let's delete this. We don't need the fake data anymore. We're going to use the proper data now. I'm going to paste that in there. So the first thing it's asking for is a leaderboard ID. So I have already set up a leaderboard. If you haven't done that, you can press this plus button in the game tab over here, and you can create your leaderboard pretty straightforward. Just enter data into each of these items. So the ID for mine is power. So I put that in quote marks in here. That the number of values that I want. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think 6 or 7 is good. So let's put in 6, and the callback. So this is going to be a function. A callback is essentially, once it's got hold of that data, it's going to run this function and it's going to pass in that table of results that it was talking about. So that's what I'm capturing there. Results. We don't do that. Like that. Oh, end. Yes. So now when it gets back, it will run this results here. And what I will do is I will just loop through those results and print them out for local I. For I equals 1, results 2. And let's just output the result. Print result. Let's do results. Yeah, it's going to get 6, isn't it? Let's just get hold of the first result and print that out. Print results 1 dot name. Let's see if that works. So attempt to index a null value. That is because my leaderboard has no results in it. So I would need to add some data into my leaderboard to do that. But essentially what the leaderboard is going to come back with is something along the lines of an array or a table in Lua with name and score. So let's create that. So the way we're going to create that is we're just going to make a local variable called fake results. We're going to create a table in that local variable, and that table is going to be full of records that are really similar to what we were doing before. Name equals supergoose1, score equals 100, and let's do the same again. Name equals supergoose2, score equals 650, and let's do a third one for good luck. Name equals supergoose3, score equals 350. So we've created some fake results. Let's pass them into our function. So I'm going to grab this, pass the results in. So fake results now rather than just fake row. Go back to the leaderboard widget. So now input that's coming in is no longer a fake row. It's an entire table full of results. So to update that, we're going to just, I'll comment these out for now, but you could just delete them. Example model dot scores. Remember, because we changed this to be scores because it's now an array of scores. Dot scores equals input. And because the input itself is this array of fake results, that makes complete sense. we test it and run it, we can see that we are passing an array from our Lua script into our UI widget. We're then iterating through that array using the game face logic and the data binding in there, and it's displaying it on the screen. It's still got the other ones underneath. That's okay. For more information about the data binding stuff, there is a really good resource, Game Face, Coherent Game Face, which is what that UI stuff is built on, has got some fantastic resources in here for figuring out how to do that, how to bind different types of data, and use the for loop stuff and if statements within the data binding to turn different elements on or off depending on what's going on. So that's a really useful resource. You can go to coherentlabs.com/documentation/CPP gameface. Yes, there's also the leaderboard stuff in the api.crayta.com documentation in here. And there's this tutorial, and I really hope this has helped clear up some of what's going on with the UI stuff. And hopefully now that you've got a bit of an understanding behind, okay, so I can access data in this way and I can bind it to HTML elements, and then I can change what they look like and the CSS of them using that method, and I can update things using the JavaScript. Now that you've got to grips with all of those, how all of those things work together, I'm really hoping that you can, that I have helped, and I look forward to seeing some of your UIs and your widgets make their way around the Crayta universe, and I look forward to seeing you in the game.